In the heart of a bustling medieval kingdom, where towering stone walls surrounded cobblestone streets and colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, stood an elite group known as the King's Guard. These warriors were more than just soldiers. They were living symbols of strength, loyalty, and tradition. Clad in shining armor that reflected the sunlight like mirrors, their presence commanded respect, and sometimes even fear, from anyone who crossed their path. The leader of this prestigious group was Captain Alden, a man whose reputation for seriousness was almost mythical. His piercing gaze could silence a noisy crowd, and his stern expression never wavered, no matter what happened around him. People often whispered about how Alden seemed carved from stone, rather than flesh and blood. Some joked that he didn't even blink unless absolutely necessary. To see him smile, that would be like spotting a unicorn wandering through the marketplace, a rare miracle indeed. Life in the kingdom revolved around rules, rituals, and customs passed down through generations. The King's Guard played a vital role in upholding these traditions, ensuring order and discipline at all times. They patrolled the streets with precision, their boots clicking rhythmically against the stones. Children admired them from afar, pretending to march alongside them during playtime, while adults bowed their heads respectfully whenever the guards passed by. Everyone knew better than to approach or disturb them. It simply wasn't done. But not everyone followed the unspoken rules. On this particular day, a stranger entered the kingdom, bringing with him an energy unlike anything the townsfolk had seen before. His name was Finn, a wandering minstrel with a quick wit and a knack for making people laugh. Dressed in mismatched clothes patched together from his travels, Finn carried only two things: a well-worn lute slung over his shoulder and a satchel filled with trinkets collected along the way. Despite his scruffy appearance, there was something magnetic about him. Perhaps it was the sparkle in his eye, or the way he moved with boundless enthusiasm. As Finn strolled through the marketplace, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between himself and the world around him. While vendors shouted prices and children chased each other through the stalls, the King's Guard stood motionless nearby, exuding an aura of untouchable authority. Curiosity bubbled inside Finn. Who were these men behind the armor? Were they truly as rigid as they appeared, or did they harbor hidden depths waiting to be uncovered? His gaze landed on one guard in particular, a tall figure stationed near the palace gates. This guard seemed especially still, as if rooted to the spot. Intrigued, Finn decided to test the limits of this sentinel's patience. Pulling out his lute, he began strumming a lively tune, weaving between shoppers and drawing attention to himself. As he danced closer to the guard, Finn added exaggerated bows and playful gestures, all while keeping one eye on the stoic figure ahead. Passers-by exchanged nervous glances, whispering warnings under their breath. "Don't provoke the guards," some muttered, shaking their heads. But Finn paid them no mind. If anything, their concern only fueled his determination. He twirled faster, sang louder, and grinned wider, refusing to let the guard's unchanging expression deter him. Little did he know, his antics had already caught the attention of someone watching from afar, someone who might not be as immune to humor as he seemed. Finn's performance in front of the stoic guard quickly became the center of attention in the marketplace. Vendors paused mid-sale, shoppers stopped to gawk, and even children abandoned their games to watch the spectacle unfold. The minstrel's antics were impossible to ignore. He spun in circles, clapped his hands, and sang at the top of his lungs, all while keeping a mischievous grin plastered across his face. His lute produced lively melodies that seemed to bounce off the cobblestones, filling the air with an infectious energy. The guard, however, remained as still as a statue. Not a single twitch of his eyebrow or shift in his stance betrayed any reaction to Finn's playful display. To onlookers, it was almost comical, a whirlwind of chaos swirling around a figure of absolute calm. Some people chuckled nervously, unsure whether to admire Finn's boldness or worry about the consequences of his actions. Others whispered among themselves, speculating how long the guard would tolerate such behavior before stepping in. Captain Alden, observing from a distance, found himself torn between irritation and amusement. On one hand, protocol demanded that the King's Guard maintain complete professionalism at all times, regardless of external distractions. On the other hand, there was something undeniably captivating about Finn's carefree spirit. Alden had spent years perfecting the art of detachment, training himself to block out anything that might disrupt his focus. Yet here was this scruffy minstrel, deliberately trying to break through that carefully constructed barrier. And succeeding, at least partially. Alden couldn't deny that Finn's enthusiasm was contagious. Despite his best efforts to remain impassive, he caught himself tapping his foot lightly against the ground in time with the music. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but enough to make him frown slightly. He forced himself to stop, reminding himself of the weight of his responsibilities. The King's Guard wasn't just a title. It was a legacy built on discipline and honor. Letting down his guard, even for a moment, felt like betraying that legacy. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. Who was this stranger, and why did he seem so determined to provoke a reaction? Most people avoided the guards, intimidated by their imposing presence and gleaming armor. But Finn didn't appear afraid. In fact, he seemed to thrive on the challenge, treating the entire situation like a game. His eyes sparkled with mischief as he continued his routine, occasionally glancing up at the guard with a sly smile, as if daring him to crack. The crowd grew larger as word spread about the minstrel's antics. Some cheered him on, urging him to keep going, while others cautioned him to back off before things escalated. One elderly woman approached Finn during a brief pause in his performance, tugging gently on his sleeve. "Boy," she said in a low voice, "you're playing with fire. Those guards don't take kindly to disrespect." Finn laughed, brushing off her warning with a wave of his hand. "Oh, come now," he replied cheerfully. "Surely even the mighty King's Guard can appreciate a bit of fun. What's life without a little laughter?" The old woman shook her head, muttering something about young fools under her breath as she shuffled away. But Finn didn't mind. He thrived on pushing boundaries, testing limits, and seeing what lay beyond them. And deep down, he sensed that this particular guard wasn't as unshakable as he appeared. There was a flicker of something in those steely eyes, something faint but undeniable. Was it annoyance? Amusement? Or maybe curiosity? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light over the bustling marketplace, Finn decided to take his act up a notch. He began weaving exaggerated stories into his songs, spinning tales of brave knights battling dragons and clever jesters outsmarting kings. Each story grew more outrageous than the last, drawing peals of laughter from the crowd. All the while, he kept circling the guard, inching closer with every verse until he was practically dancing around him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Finn struck a dramatic pose directly in front of the guard, strumming a final chord on his lute. "Well," he asked, tilting his head expectantly, "what do you think? Am I worthy of joining your ranks, O noble protector?" For a split second, Alden thought he saw the corner of the guard's mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close enough to send a ripple of surprise through the onlookers. Then, just as quickly, the guard's expression returned to its usual stoic mask. Without uttering a word, he turned sharply on his heel and marched away, leaving Finn standing alone in the middle of the square. But Finn didn't look disappointed. If anything, he seemed triumphant. As the crowd dispersed, murmuring excitedly about what they'd just witnessed, Finn slung his lute back over his shoulder and cried. Word of Finn's antics in the marketplace spread quickly, reaching even the ears of the king himself. Known for his love of music and lively entertainment, the monarch was intrigued by the tales of a wandering minstrel who had dared to challenge the stoic demeanor of the King's Guard. Curiosity got the better of him, and he summoned Finn to perform at the evening feast, a grand affair attended by nobles, knights, and dignitaries from across the realm. When Finn received the invitation, he couldn't believe his luck. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined being invited to play for royalty. Still, He approached the task with his usual confidence, brushing off any nerves with a shrug and a grin. "If they want a show," he muttered to himself as he adjusted the strap of his lute, "then a show they'll get." That evening, Finn entered the grand hall, feeling both exhilarated and out of place. The room was a dazzling display of wealth and opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering light over long tables laden with golden platters of food. Nobles dressed in fine silks and jewels filled the space, their laughter mingling with the clinking of goblets. At the far end of the hall sat the king, resplendent on his throne-like chair, flanked by advisors and members of the royal family. Standing nearby, as always, were the king's guard, their armor gleaming under the candlelight. Finn took a deep breath and stepped forward, bowing low before the king. "Your Majesty," he said with a playful flourish, "I am honored to share my humble talents with you tonight." The king chuckled warmly, gesturing for him to begin. With a wink at the crowd, Finn launched into his performance, strumming his lute with gusto. His songs ranged from humorous ballads about bumbling knights to heartfelt melodies that spoke of distant lands and adventures. Each note seemed to weave its way into the hearts of those listening, drawing smiles, laughter, and even a few tears. As Finn played, he noticed Captain Alden standing silently near the throne, watching him with an unreadable expression. Unlike the other guards, whose eyes scanned the room for potential threats, Alden's gaze remained fixed on the minstrel. There was no scowl this time, no trace of irritation, just quiet observation. It made Finn wonder what the captain was thinking. Was he impressed, annoyed, or perhaps amused? By the time Finn finished his final song, the entire hall erupted into applause. Even the usually reserved nobles clapped enthusiastically, some rising to their feet in appreciation. The king himself stood, raising his goblet in a toast. "Bravo," he declared, his voice booming through the hall. "You have brought joy to our court, young minstrel. Such talent deserves recognition. Tell me, what reward would you seek for your efforts?" Finn hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the question. He hadn't expected anything in return for his performance. But then, an idea struck him. "Your Majesty," he said with a mischievous glint in his eye, "if it pleases you, I ask only for permission to stay in the castle for a few days. I wish to explore its wonders and learn more about the kingdom I've heard so much about." The request was unusual, to say the least. Outsiders rarely set foot inside the palace walls, let alone stayed as guests. Yet the king, charmed by Finn's charisma and charm, agreed without hesitation. "So be it," he said with a smile. "You shall have free reign of the castle during your stay. Consider yourself our guest." News of the king's decision rippled through the court, sparking whispers of disbelief and admiration. Many wondered why the king would grant such favor to a common traveler, while others marveled at Finn's ability to win people over so effortlessly. For Finn, however, the invitation was more than just an opportunity to see the castle. It was a chance to delve deeper into the world of the king's guard and uncover the humanity hidden beneath their polished armor. As the feast drew to a close, Finn found himself reflecting on the events of the day. From his playful encounter in the marketplace to his unexpected audience with the king, everything felt like part of a grand adventure. Little did he know, the most surprising chapter of his journey was yet to come, and it would involve none other than the enigmatic Captain Alden. Over the next few days, Finn made himself at home in the castle, exploring every nook and cranny with the same boundless curiosity that defined his travels. The grand halls, towering spires, and sprawling gardens became his playground, and he quickly earned a reputation among the servants and courtiers as the minstrel who never sits still. His lute was always slung over his shoulder, ready to burst into song at a moment's notice, and his cheerful demeanor brightened even the dreariest corners of the palace. One of Finn's favorite spots soon became the training grounds, where the king's guard practiced their drills each morning. The rhythmic clang of swords, the sharp commands echoing through the air, and the sight of armored figures moving in perfect unison fascinated him. It was like watching a dance, one performed with steel instead of music. He couldn't resist joining in, albeit from a safe distance. With exaggerated movements, Finn mimicked the guard stances, pretending to parry invisible blows or thrust an imaginary sword into the air. His antics drew laughter from nearby servants and apprentices, though the guards themselves remained stoic, refusing to acknowledge him. Captain Alden, however, noticed everything. From his position overseeing the training sessions, he watched Finn with a mix of irritation and reluctant amusement. There was something undeniably endearing about the minstrel's enthusiasm, even if it bordered on absurd. Alden found himself wondering how someone could radiate so much joy simply by existing. It was a stark contrast to his own life, which had been shaped by duty, discipline, and sacrifice. One afternoon, after the guards had finished their exercises, Alden decided to confront Finn, not out of anger, but out of curiosity. As the minstrel lounged beneath a tree, strumming a lazy tune on his lute, Alden approached him, his armor clinking softly with each step. Finn looked up, startled for a moment, before breaking into a wide grin. "Ah, Captain Alden," he exclaimed, sitting up straighter. "Have you finally come to challenge me to a duel? Or perhaps learn a verse or two?" Alden crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. "Neither," he replied curtly. "I merely wish to understand why you insist on making a spectacle of yourself." Finn chuckled, unfazed by the captain's stern tone. "A spectacle, you say? I prefer to think of it as spreading a little cheer. Life's too short to take everything so seriously. Don't you agree?" Alden frowned, taken aback by the question. No one had ever dared to speak to him so casually, let alone question his way of life. For a moment, he considered walking away, dismissing the conversation as pointless. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the sincerity in Finn's voice, or maybe it was the faint memory of a time when he, too, had felt a spark of carefree joy. Whatever the reason, Alden stayed. "Spreading cheer won't protect the kingdom," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "It takes strength, discipline, and unwavering focus to uphold our duties. Fun has no place here." Finn tilted his head, studying the captain thoughtfully. "And yet, isn't it possible to have both? Strength and joy aren't opposites. They can go hand in hand. Imagine what your men might accomplish if they carried not just their swords, but also a sense of purpose that comes from happiness." The words struck a chord deep within Alden, though he didn't show it. Instead, he glanced around the training grounds, where a group of young recruits were struggling to master a particularly difficult maneuver. Their frustration was evident, and Alden knew exactly how they felt. He had once been in their shoes, pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion in pursuit of perfection. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what it meant to enjoy the journey. "You make it sound simple," Alden said quietly, turning back to Finn. "But change doesn't come easily." "True," Finn admitted with a shrug. "But sometimes, all it takes is one small step to start something big. Why not try it? What do you have to lose?" For the first time in years, Alden felt a flicker of doubt about the rigid path he had chosen. Could there be another way? A way that balanced duty with delight? He didn't have answers, but the seed of possibility had been planted, and Finn, with his endless charm and wisdom disguised as whimsy, seemed determined to nurture it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grounds, Alden realized he wasn't quite ready to leave the conversation behind. "Tell me more," he said gruffly, surprising even himself. Finn's grin widened, and he began sharing stories of his travels, painting vivid pictures of lands where laughter and courage walked side by side. For the first time in a long while, Alden found himself listening, not as a captain, but as a man eager to see the world through new eyes. As the days passed, Finn and Captain Alden found themselves spending more time together, their unlikely friendship blossoming in quiet moments between duty and routine. What began as a curious exchange on the training grounds soon turned into regular walks along the castle ramparts, where they could talk freely without prying eyes or ears. The towering stone walls offered a breathtaking view of the kingdom below. Rolling hills dotted with farms, winding rivers glinting in the sunlight, and distant forests stretching toward the horizon. It was here, away from the rigid formality of the palace, that both men revealed pieces of themselves they rarely shared with others. Finn spoke openly about his life as a wandering minstrel, describing the thrill of exploring new places and meeting strangers who became friends, if only for a short while. He told stories of bustling marketplaces filled with exotic spices, quiet villages nestled in mountain valleys, and stormy nights spent huddled by a campfire under a canopy of stars. Each tale painted a vivid picture of freedom and adventure, qualities that seemed almost foreign to Alden's structured existence. For his part, Alden listened intently, captivated by the world Finn described, a world so different from the one he knew. In return, he shared glimpses of his own journey, the years of grueling training, the sacrifices he'd made to rise through the ranks of the King's Guard, and the weight of responsibility that came with protecting the crown. "There's honor in what we do," Alden admitted one evening, his voice tinged with both pride and weariness. "But sometimes, I wonder if I've lost something along the way." "Lost what?" Finn asked gently, strumming a soft chord on his lute as they walked. Alden hesitated, searching for the right words. "Myself," he said finally. "The person I used to be before duty consumed me." Finn nodded thoughtfully, understanding the sentiment all too well. "It happens to the best of us," he replied. "We get so caught up in doing what's expected of us that we forget to live for ourselves. But it's never too late to find that part of you again." Their conversations weren't always deep. Sometimes, they simply laughed over silly jokes or debated which type of pie was superior. Finn staunchly defended apple, while Alden leaned toward cherry. These lighter moments brought a sense of ease to their bond, allowing Alden to let down his guard in ways he hadn't thought possible. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a symbol of authority, but as a man with dreams, doubts, and desires. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Finn posed a question that lingered in the air like the final note of a song. If you could do anything, without worrying about rules or expectations, what would it be? Alden stared out at the horizon, considering the question carefully. The idea of stepping outside the boundaries of his role felt daunting, even dangerous. Yet, as he looked at Finn's expectant face, he allowed himself to imagine. "I suppose I'd like to feel free," he said slowly. "To laugh without restraint, to make mistakes without judgment, to connect with people beyond titles or ranks." Finn smiled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well then," he said, clapping his hands together, "it sounds like you need a little help breaking those chains." Before Alden could protest, Finn launched into an elaborate plan involving small acts of rebellion. Things like skipping formalities during meals, sneaking off to explore hidden parts of the castle, or even attempting to teach the guards a dance move or two. At first, Alden dismissed the ideas as ridiculous, but Finn's enthusiasm was infectious. "Think about it," Finn urged. "What's the worst that could happen? You'll have a story to tell, or better yet, a memory to cherish." Though skeptical, Alden couldn't deny the appeal of Finn's proposal. Deep down, he longed to experience the kind of joy and spontaneity Finn embodied. And so, reluctantly, he agreed, to a point. They decided to start small, with a gesture simple enough not to draw suspicion, but meaningful enough to leave an impact. By the end of their conversation, Alden felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. He had spent his entire life adhering to tradition, never daring to deviate from the path laid out before him. But now, standing beside this eccentric minstrel who saw the world in colors he had forgotten existed, Alden realized he was ready to take a step into the unknown, even if it meant risking everything he had worked so hard to build. The plan was set, though Alden couldn't quite believe he had agreed to it. The idea of stepping outside the rigid confines of his role as captain of the King's Guard felt both thrilling and terrifying. Finn, ever the optimist, assured him that everything would go smoothly. "Trust me," he said with a wink. "This will be fun. And who knows, you might even enjoy it." Their scheme revolved around a single, simple act, surprising someone in the kingdom with a gesture of goodwill, a high five. To Finn, it was more than just a playful slap of the hand. It was a universal symbol of connection, a way to bridge gaps between people regardless of rank or status. Alden, however, wasn't entirely convinced. "A high five?" he repeated skeptically. "That's your grand plan?" Finn laughed, slapping his own palm against his thigh for emphasis. "It's not just any high five, it's the high five. It's unexpected, it's fun, and most importantly, it breaks down walls. Imagine the look on someone's face when they get one from the mighty Captain Alden himself." Despite his reservations, Alden found himself intrigued by the concept. He had spent years maintaining a stoic exterior, keeping his emotions locked away behind layers of armor and protocol. The thought of letting someone see a different side of him, of showing vulnerability, even in such a small way, was daunting but oddly appealing. Still, tradition weighed heavily on his mind. "What if people think I'm being unprofessional?" he asked, voicing his lingering doubts. Finn waved off the concern with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "People won't care about professionalism if they're smiling. Besides, isn't it better to be remembered for bringing joy than for always being serious? Trust me, once you try it, you'll see how powerful a little gesture can be." With some reluctance, Alden finally relented, agreeing to give the plan a shot. They decided the perfect opportunity would come during the next public gathering in the square, a weekly event where townsfolk gathered to hear announcements from the king's advisors. Crowds were sure to be large, providing plenty of potential recipients for Alden's surprise high five. In preparation, Finn drilled Alden relentlessly, practicing the motion over and over until it felt natural. At first, Alden struggled, his movements stiff and awkward. "Relax," Finn urged, demonstrating again with exaggerated flair. "You're supposed to make it look effortless, like you do this all the time." "I don't do this all the time," Alden muttered under his breath, earning a laugh from Finn. But after several attempts, Alden began to loosen up, his gestures growing smoother and more confident. By the end of their practice session, he could almost picture himself pulling it off without hesitation. As the day of the gathering approached, Alden's nerves kicked into high gear. He rehearsed the scenario in his mind countless times, imagining every possible outcome. Would the recipient recoil in shock, laugh nervously, or worse, ignore him completely? Each possibility sent a fresh wave of doubt coursing through him, but Finn remained steadfast in his encouragement. "You've got this," he said firmly. "Just focus on the moment and let instinct take over." On the morning of the event, Alden woke early, his stomach churning with anticipation. He donned his armor as usual, ensuring every buckle and strap was perfectly in place. As he stood before the mirror, adjusting his cloak, he caught a glimpse of something unfamiliar in his reflection. Not fear, exactly, but a spark of excitement. For the first time in years, he felt alive in a way that went beyond duty or obligation. When he met Finn in the courtyard later that day, the minstrel greeted him with a wide grin. "Ready to make history?" he asked, holding out his hand for a final practice round. Alden hesitated for only a moment before slapping his palm against Finn's, the sound echoing softly in the crisp morning air. "Ready," Alden replied, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. Together, they made their way toward the square, where an unsuspecting crowd awaited, and where Alden was about to take a step into uncharted territory. The square buzzed with energy as townsfolk gathered to hear the king's advisors announce the latest news about trade routes and harvest quotas. Children darted between stalls, merchants shouted their wares, and the air was thick with the mingling scents of fresh bread, roasted nuts, and spices. Captain Alden stood at the edge of the crowd, his armor gleaming under the midday sun, feeling distinctly out of place amidst the lively chaos. His heart pounded in his chest, not from exertion, but from the weight of what he was about to do. Finn lingered nearby, blending seamlessly into the throng of people. He flashed Alden an encouraging grin before disappearing into the crowd, leaving the captain to scan the sea of faces for the perfect candidate. Alden's eyes darted nervously from person to person. A baker arranging loaves on a cart, an elderly woman knitting by a fountain, a group of giggling children chasing each other around a stack of crates. Then his gaze landed on someone who made him pause, a young boy clutching a wooden sword almost as tall as he was. The child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, yet he carried himself with the swagger of a seasoned knight. His tunic was tied with a makeshift sash, and his boots were scuffed from hours of play. As Alden watched, the boy swung his sword dramatically, pretending to fend off invisible enemies, while narrating his heroic exploits to no one in particular. There was something endearing and familiar about the scene. It reminded Alden of his own childhood, when he too had dreamed of valor and adventure without the burdens of responsibility weighing him down. Taking a deep breath, Alden stepped forward, his boots clicking against the cobblestones. The sound drew the boy's attention, and his imaginary battle came to an abrupt halt. Wide-eyed, the child stared up at the towering figure of the king's guard, his mouth slightly agape. For a moment, Alden hesitated, suddenly aware of how imposing he must look. But then he remembered Finn's words, "Focus on the moment." Kneeling slowly to bring himself closer to the boy's level, Alden offered a small, genuine smile. "Well done, young warrior," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of nerves inside him. "I've seen your bravery from afar. You fight with honor and skill." The boy blinked, clearly unsure whether this was real or some elaborate trick. "Thank you, sir," he stammered, gripping his wooden sword tighter. Alden extended his hand, palm facing upward. "You've earned this," he added warmly. Before the boy could respond, Alden slapped his palm lightly against the child's in a triumphant high five. The sharp crack of skin meeting skin echoed through the square, cutting through the hum of conversation like a bell ringing in silence. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The boy's eyes widened further, his lips curling into a delighted grin. Then, unable to contain his excitement, he let out a cheer loud enough to turn heads. "He gave me a high five," the boy exclaimed, waving his hand in the air as though it were a trophy. "The captain of the king's guard gave me a high five." Gasps rippled through the crowd as people turned to see what all the commotion was about. Some laughed in disbelief, others clapped enthusiastically, and a few even wiped away tears of joy. The sight of the stoic captain engaging in such a light-hearted gesture was nothing short of extraordinary. Within moments, whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that? Is he sick? Or maybe cursed? No, I think he's just human." Finn emerged from the crowd, beaming with pride as he caught Alden's eye. He gave a subtle thumbs up, silently congratulating the captain for pulling off the impossible. Alden rose to his feet, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhilaration wash over him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a symbol of authority. He felt like a man who had connected with another soul in the simplest yet most profound way. As the boy ran off to tell his friends about his encounter, the crowd erupted into applause, cheering not just for Alden, but for the humanity they had glimpsed beneath the armor. And though Alden returned to his post with his usual composed demeanor, there was a newfound lightness in his step, a reminder that even the smallest gestures could leave the biggest impact. The story of Captain Alden's high five spread faster than wildfire through the kingdom. By evening, it was the talk of every tavern, marketplace, and household. People couldn't stop marveling at the moment when the stoic leader of the king's guard had broken tradition to share a simple gesture of joy with a child. Some recounted the tale with dramatic flair, claiming they saw tears in Alden's eyes, which wasn't true, while others speculated that Finn must have cast some kind of spell on him, also not true. Regardless of the embellishments, one thing was clear: something extraordinary had happened. Even the king heard about it during his afternoon council meeting. At first, he raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to reprimand Alden for stepping out of line or commend him for bringing such delight to the people. But as reports poured in, stories of laughter, smiles, and renewed admiration for the king's guard, the king decided to let the matter rest. Perhaps, he mused aloud to his advisors, a little humanity is exactly what we need sometimes. For Alden, the aftermath was both humbling and overwhelming. Everywhere he went, people greeted him with grins and nods, their respect mingled with newfound warmth. Children pointed at him excitedly, whispering, "That's the high-five captain." Even his fellow guards, who usually maintained strict professionalism, couldn't resist teasing him good-naturedly. "Next thing you know," one joked, "you'll be teaching us how to dance." Finn, meanwhile, reveled in the success of his plan. Though he knew it was time to continue his travels, he felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving. Over the past few days, the castle had begun to feel like home, not because of its grand halls or towering walls, but because of the friendships he'd forged within them. Before departing, he sought out Alden one last time. They met in the quiet solitude of the castle gardens, where the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. Finn carried a small wooden charm shaped like a hand, which he handed to Alden with a mischievous smile. "A token to remember me by," he said. Engraved on the charm were the words, "A single gesture can change the world." Alden turned the charm over in his fingers, studying it thoughtfully. "You've already changed mine," he admitted quietly. For once, there was no trace of stiffness or formality in his tone, just genuine gratitude. Finn chuckled, slinging his lute over his shoulder. "Well, don't get too soft now. The kingdom still needs its fearless captain. Just, maybe let him laugh once in a while." With that, Finn bid farewell, disappearing through the gates as quickly as he had arrived. As Alden watched him go, he realized how much the minstrel had taught him. Not just about spontaneity, but about connection. Life wasn't meant to be lived behind walls of duty. It was meant to be shared, celebrated, and cherished. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to ripple through the king's guard. Inspired by Alden's example, the guard started finding ways to connect with the townsfolk, whether it was sharing a kind word, helping carry goods, or even joining in a festival dance. These small acts transformed their image from distant protectors to beloved figures of trust and camaraderie. As for Alden, he kept the charm close to his heart, carrying it with him wherever he went. It served as a reminder of the day he stepped outside his comfort zone and discovered a part of himself he thought he'd lost. He never forgot Finn's infectious spirit or the lesson he'd learned, that even the smallest gestures could bridge divides and create moments of magic. And so, the legacy of the high five lived on, a testament to the power of breaking barriers, embracing joy, and proving that beneath every suit of armor beats a human heart.